Hi everyone, this is Ken Briggs with Current History, back with a quick take on recent developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the negotiations. So, if you've been following Ukraine coverage over the past couple of weeks, it probably feels like something has changed. Not in the battlefield, but politically. The language has become a bit more careful, the action's more institutional, and Europe has started behaving, in my view, like an actor that expects to be at the table when the war's outcome is decided. So in the last 2 weeks, European governments took several steps that I think are hard to ignore. So the EU formally advanced the creation of a centralized registry to document war damage in Ukraine. The system is designed to record destroyed homes, property, and civilian losses. So Europe is locking legal records now while the war is still ongoing in anticipation of future claims and compensation. European leaders also decided to indefinitely freeze Russian assets as a long-term funding base for Ukraine. This matters because it signals a change in assumptions. So these assets aren't being treated as chips to be traded in a negotiation. They're being prepared as financial infrastructure to sustain Ukraine over several years. So these aren't the actions of actors expecting a clean near-term settlement. They're the actions of governments preparing for an unresolved outcome and trying to shape what comes after. So at the same time, pressure has been building along Europe's edge on the east, where this is not theoretical. So Lithuania triggered an emergency after several incidents of airborne objects crossing into Lithuanian airspace from Belarus. None of this escalated to war, but that's the point. These incidents were treated seriously because they fit a pattern of gray zone pressure by Russia to basically test and provoke reactions. So for these frontline states, this is an abstract, so they blur the line between the war in Ukraine and European security and force the EU to think less about the future and more about how do we solve the immediate crisis. So this is the environment Russia has been operating over the last 2 weeks. Moscow has paired continued military pressure with signals of openness to talks, which may be a smokescreen to delay, especially as they see the wedge between the EU and Europe grow wider, and that begins to look like Russia will have more leverage the longer this goes. So Ukraine is watching this closely. Publicly, its leaders keep rejecting any discussion of territorial concessions, which remains essential to their position. Domestically, it preserves legitimacy. Internationally, it maintains leverage. But the conversation with Ukraine's partners is not about winning quickly. It's how to endure without losing control of the outcome, so maximizing leverage. And Europe's role in that conversation is growing. So over the past 2 weeks, Europe has now announced a Grand Peace Initiative. It's built institutional mechanisms as influence as Europe asserts itself without directly declaring what its strategy is. It's about getting to the table. So Europe basically is not positioning itself as a supporting actor waiting for Washington to decide the end game or force Ukraine into a settlement. It's trying to be a principal that expects to live with the consequences and wants to say how those consequences occur and what they are. That does have a risk because it also means owning the compromises that follow, and that Europe will be responsible for Ukraine's survival and stability, and it will have to confront gray zone pressure by Russia on its own. So for Russia, this is an opportunity. Europe, if it's more exposed, is also possibly more cautious, and that's reassuring and dangerous for Ukraine. So greater European involvement can anchor the long-term support, but it can also pressure Ukraine to accept a negative outcome for the sake of stability. One of the scenarios that's starting to come into play that may result in a settlement that's not ideal for Ukraine is this recent push by the President Trump, to add Article 5 security guarantees or Article 5 style security guarantees to the final deal with Ukraine. But then Trump says that if Ukraine doesn't accept this deal, according to territorial concessions quickly, that it's off the table. And again, that's Trump trying to force Ukraine to abandon in this quickly. And it seems in response that some European countries are talking about giving them these type of security guarantees as part of a final settlement up front, but outside the framework for NATO. And I think that's key, because I think any deal that would last coming out of this is going to be a deal that gives significant security guarantees to Ukraine while giving Russia the fig leaf of a win of withholding those guarantees outside the context of NATO. So this fine line of Ukraine, you're not going to be in NATO, but you're going to get this NATO security guarantees. So we'll see where that dance leads. So the danger isn't that a bad deal will be signed tomorrow. It's something quieter, which is a slow normalization of this war, where interim arrangements become basically the permanent arrangement. And Ukraine has to accept something worse than it would if it settled now. So the past couple of weeks suggest that Europe understands the threat. It understands that it's going to have to step up, especially with the U.S. signaling that there won't be as much support as in the past. So whether Europe has the political will to shape the outcome, we'll see. I think they can do it, but it takes cooperation and coordination that they haven't necessarily exhibited before. So those are my thoughts on this. Would love to hear what you think about this in the comments. But thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.